called Our Character at Work, and he will have those available. And then he has some other books, including Giving Church Another Chance. This is a book that's wonderful to give to those who are struggling to find a church or just coming back into church, or friends that are searching. You can give that, and he can sell them to you at a very wonderful rate for a case of those to give them away. So you can see him anytime after this session, from before lunch and during lunch and after. He'll be at his table to sign books and answer questions about either the books or his talks. Bishop Todd is a wonderful man of God. He is the bishop of the Church for the Sake of Others diocese, and their primary mission is to plant churches and bring those who do not know the Lord to the Lord. He likes to walk on the beach, particularly at Corona del Mar, which is one of the places that he encounters the Lord mightily. Having been influenced in his life by a number of people for faith, including John Wimber and Chuck Smith, but particularly in the Anglican world, John Stott and J.I. Packer, as well as N.T. Wright, all have had an influence on him, understanding what it means to be Orthodox and Anglican, even before he himself crossed the Thames. So we are thankful for that and the work that he does on behalf of the kingdom and the province. His favorite verse, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Matthew 11:28 through 32. So if we could welcome Bishop Todd, we'll give him a prayer, and then we'll listen to what the Lord has given us from him. Thank you. Almighty and gracious Father in heaven, we thank you for this, your servant, who you've called to be an apostle and teacher and pastor. We ask, Lord, that you would send forth your Spirit upon him in a mighty way, that not only would he speak your word to us in a way that renews and restores and challenges us, but, Lord, that would continue to uplift him and the ministry to which you've called him. Take this time, make it your time, even as you make him your man. And it's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Good morning. So Bishop Keith, knowing that my recent book was a book on servant leadership, asked me if I would try to take a couple of the servant leadership thoughts that are in the gospel reading we've been working with in our time together. And he gave me the working title of Forming Servant Leaders that Reproduce Their Life in Others. And so the first thing probably to say that in the passage we've been reading, that is precisely what is happening. As Jesus works with his first friends, he's not merely kind of catechizing them the way we would think of that, which obviously is a very good thing to do. But he's not merely passing on bits of doctrine. He's not even merely reinterpreting the Jewish story, while, of course, he is doing that. But what he is doing is imparting his life. Are you feeling me here? He's imparting his life to them. That which animates and energizes and structures and orients his life, his goal is to pass that on to them. So Luke 22, if you go forward 12 chapters in Luke, and you get to near the end of Jesus' career, when he's beginning now to send them and tell them that I'm going to die and be gone from you. I love the way Eugene Peterson gets this part of Luke 22 in the Message. Kings like to throw their weight around, and people in authority like to give themselves fancy titles. It's not going to be that way with you. Let the senior among you become like the junior, and let the leader act the part of the servant. Now, for those of us, in this tribe, for whom orthodoxy is exquisitely important, and as Russell said, while I didn't have your journey, my journey has been in the Jesus movement, as president of Vineyard Churches, and in kind of the, mainstream evangelical world is the world from which I came into Anglicanism, but haven't been around now for 7 years, and I might say haven't grown up in a highly liberal United Methodist church. The parallels between liberal Methodism and liberal Episcopalianism, you're kind of splitting hairs. They're kind of running along the same tracks. So I can have empathy for this tribe, a genuine, I think, and fairly profound, honest empathy. I can't say I've lived your journey, but I just want to help you think about this. It's one thing to have, let's say, an Orthodox Christology, that Jesus was born of a virgin, or that Jesus is God. You just start thinking of bits of orthodoxy that would be very important to those of us who've come out of tribes who were, sort of fleeing orthodoxy as fast as they could. But that is not the same thing as asking and answering the question, is Jesus smart? You can believe he's born of a virgin. You can have an orthodox soteriology of, what his death on the cross means. You can have an orthodox eschatology of how he is going to come back again, as we'll read in the Advent lessons this year. You can have orthodox beliefs all about that, but have no intention to follow him into the things he taught because you don't actually think he's smart. You don't actually think he knows what he's talking about. I mean, do you think Jesus, if he walked into a room like this and it was full of the latest MBAs from Wharton and Harvard and Stanford, do you think Jesus would sort of wilt? Like, well, I don't know. I might not know as much about leadership as you guys. I didn't get my MBA from Wharton. See, unless you think Jesus is smart, you won't actually become like the junior. You won't actually act the part of a servant. Because what we're tempted to say is, doesn't Jesus know that actually the only way to get things done in the real world is to precisely throw your weight around? And so we're tempted to think, isn't Jesus naive? I mean, doesn't he know that servants get bullied while real leaders get rewarded? Because they learn how to amass power and throw it around. So let's begin our time together just by working with a couple of the thoughts that come out of Luke 10 about forming servant leaders. And then I'll give you having just placed those Luke 10 thoughts before our minds, I'll give you some ways of living into servant leadership. So firstly, Jesus says, I have given you authority. And authority translates that Greek term exousia, which means power. I have given you power, and I have given you the authority to act with that power. Now, let me tell you here, one of the first mistakes that Christians or spiritually minded people make about this is when they sometimes first start having thoughts about servant leadership, they think, I know what we need to do. We just need to get rid of power from the equation. So let's get rid of power out of the rector's office. Maybe let's get the sense of power out of holy orders. Let's get the sense of power out of vestries. Let's get the sense of power out of our sort of democratic voting processes. And you can't do that. Power is a part of the world the way air is a part of our world. You have a lot of choices you can make about power. The one you don't have is let's get rid of it in our system. You can't. Power is an aspect of all of creation, not just humankind. So we have to do something different. Jesus actually gave you power. Do you see what I'm saying? So do you see how dumb it would be then to think, well, let's get rid of power? Because, right, what's the famous saying about power? Yeah, and absolute power corrupts. So then the notion is, well, then I think the answer to our corruption must mean to get rid of power. And I'm here to tell you the answer is to get rid of our corruption is the change in our heart, not to get rid of power. It's to become the kind of people for whom the exercise of power, here, let me put it this way, here's where we want to go, that in the exercise of my power as a leader, this is my constant prayer, my constant orientation. I pray all the time, God, may people experience me as for their good. So I don't have the luxury of getting rid of power as a leader. And I've been a leader my whole life. I started my first church when I was 21. I was a bishop in the sense of I was a regional overseer of, dozens, scores of churches at 26 or 27. I mean, in a sense, I've been doing this my whole life. I was president of a denomination at 37 or 38. So I've been working with and around power my whole life. And I know that you can't get rid of power. But what I can do is go on a journey of the spiritual transformation of my heart into Christ-likeness, so that in the exercise of my power, whether it's through my office or my gifts or just my person, that people would experience my intermingling with power as for their good. And this is the life that Jesus is trying to pass on to his followers. Because Jesus, coming from the Trinity in his incarnation, would have come to this earth full of what? Power and glory. And just wait till you get to the Advent readings this year. I mean, you've seen them all before, but this year's readings are all about the power of his coming again and insisting on the justice of God. So what this little saying, "I have given you power," teaches us is that a servant leader working with God never has to grab for power, never has to strive for permission or to harm others to get their way. Why? Because when we work with God, we're working in concert with ultimate power. When you're working with God, you don't have to go find power. You know, it's kind of a lot of power to say, "Let there be light." And there's light. That's kind of a big deal. And so I pray all the time. This is something my mentor and coach Dallas Willard taught me. I just prayed it before I walked into this room. Dallas used to say to me, "Todd, you know, life is just really like this, and prayer is just really like this. It's what are you and Jesus doing together today?" And so before I was walking in the room, I said, "Okay, Jesus, we're just going to go teach now, and so let's do this together." And do you see what I'm saying? It's you're not dismissing power. You're trying to harness what has been given to you. Well, Jesus says, "I've given you authority or power." So our role is to receive it and exercise it in a way that people experience it as for their good. So then, what's like the so what of this first idea? Well, the so what is what Gary was telling us about last night. This means we can let go of control, that we don't have to control outcomes. Dallas used to say to me, "Todd, doing ministry is a lot like bowling." And I'd go, "What?" And he'd say, "Yeah, you know, you stand there and you get ready, you prepare the best you can. But, you know, once you've let the ball go, you just abandon the outcome to God." That you don't have to control the outcome. You prepare your best. You know, you never show up somewhere to do ministry unprepared. You always prepare your best, your heart, your mind, your soul, your data, your teaching. You prepare your best. But once the words leave your mouth and they come to an audience, it's up to the Spirit to do what he's doing. Would you realize how releasing that is? To not have to control the outcome of my teaching in your heart and mind. I have no need to control the outcome. I've abandoned it to God. But see, on the other hand, thinking that you have to control outcomes is the basic and all-purpose human rationale for all manner of evil. Just think of a recent vestry meeting. Seriously, where somebody was determined to control the outcome. Once that happens, once an outcome is more important than anything else, that is the human rationale that releases all manner of evil. And we hear it in the rationale even in our political discourse today. I'm sorry to bring that up, but right is true. The end justifies any means. So just look at the end that you think you might get from any political candidate, whether it's national politics, state, local, whatever, and the end justifies the means. So we can say anything we want about each other because, you know, the end justifies the means. This is the rationale for all manner of human evil. Well, then, you know, Jesus sends them out to cast out demons. They're successful in this case in doing this, and they come back to him, and Jesus says to them, "Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven." Now, what are we to make of that little saying? I want to say, I think it's this. It's an invitation to an essential Godward orientation. And that is to say, when I'm thinking right and feeling right and doing right, my orientation right now is not primarily to my notes. It's not primarily to you. It's primarily a Godward orientation. So when I walk into a vestry meeting, or I'm doing any act of leadership, or I'm doing pastoral counseling or something, my orientation is not to what's happening, whether I succeeded at casting out a demon or not. But Jesus says, rejoice in a transcendent reality. And he uses this phrase here, that your names are written in heaven. But what he's actually inviting you to is a way of living that includes yourself, of course. It includes the people and events of your life. But listen to me, cannot be reduced to them. So a meeting, a difficult conversation can never be reduced to that difficult person. It can never be reduced to the emotional processes that might be going on in me as I know I have to talk to that person. But it always includes them, right? We're not dualists. We're not talking about thinking only about God or only about the Spirit. No, we're talking about how those things come together, but for us in some sort of transcendent way. This is what Jesus has in mind, where he's tested by the Pharisees, or he's on trial, or he walks through this pool area where there's all kinds of people waiting to get in when the waters swirl. Just think of all Jesus's life. He finds a woman at the well. He sees a funeral procession going by. And this is what Jesus says of himself. I have come to do my Father's will. So you hear that orientation. But it doesn't mean that's his only orientation. He sees the funeral procession of this widow whose only son has died. But his life is not reduced to that, not even reduced to the pity one might feel. And his life is not reduced to his own emotional processes that he might feel about that. But including all those, his orientation is to his Father. When he says, it is actually my food. Remember that passage in John? It's my nourishment to do the Father's will. I only do, he says, and say what I hear and see the Father doing. That's his essential orientation. And Jesus wants to say that is the key to servant leadership. If your orientation is on your own sense of being a leader or on the people and events of your life, that will lead almost always to power models of leadership. Because the rationale of I need to control the outcome of how I feel or the effect of whatever this act of leadership is. And Jesus wants to say, if you want to actually live into the practices of servant leadership, your sense of life has to include those things, because like I said, we're not dualists. But there has to be some sort of transcendent reality over that where we say, given the people events of my life, given my calendar, I only do what I see the Father doing. I only say what I hear him saying. And you think, dang, Todd, that seems like hard, if not impossible. Yes, unless Jesus' life is being imparted to you. Are you feeling me here? Not principles of leadership, as good as they can be. I mean, my undergraduate degree is in business. It's in leadership. My doctorate's in leadership. I read the literature. I like it. But I just know that it can only take me so far. Those principles are good. I read pretty much the new, leadership management stuff that comes out. I'm not in any way knocking it. I'm just saying that's way different than saying doing the Father's will nourishes me. I have food to eat that you don't know of. Doing what my Father's doing, saying what he's saying, that nourishes my soul. Well, next Jesus says that these things have been hidden from the wise and understanding, but have been revealed to little children. Yes, Father, so such was your gracious will. And this begins to alert us. And what Jesus was trying to do was to alert his first friends to the hidden reality from which he was working. So think of Peter. Lord, even if everybody else runs, I won't. And I'm paraphrasing here. Jesus says to him, essentially, Peter, I know something you don't know. You remain unknowingly afraid. And that when the rubber meets the road, you're not yet the kind of person who can live into that vow you just made. See, Jesus never challenges the sincerity of Peter's vow. I think Jesus knows that Peter's vow is completely sincere. But Jesus knows something else. You are not yet in touch enough with that transcendent reality to feel safe when you're confronted about being one of my people. Now, Jesus, on the other hand, think of Jesus in the garden. He's in a completely different place. I just kind of picture him going, oh, Yvette, like, put away your sword. Can't you see that I'm safe here? I am not unafraid. I'm not afraid here. I'm not intimidated by the power of Caesar or Rome. Can't you see that I could call on myriads of angels? I don't need your sword. If I felt afraid here, I could just call on myriads of angels. And this is the transcendent reality that the Bible is always trying to introduce us to, not for the sake of doctrinal precision that there is a transcendent reality, but to call us into a life wherein when we feel stuck, we see chariots of fire. When we're being stoned to death like Stephen, we look up as we're taking our last breath and see a doorway into heaven opened and realize that's my reality. And that as I take a last breath, it's actually not a last breath. I am never going to die. I am simply going to transcend into a different reality. That's the background that we're invited to live into. And if you don't hear anything else I say this morning, you got to hear this. If you do not give your life to that in reality, then you will lead through power. You will create your own, find your own, amass your own, save your own, and then use it against others. There is no two ways about this. There is very little gray area here. If you think Jesus is smart. If you think he's just God's provision for the forgiveness of your sins, that's one thing. But do you think he's smart? Do you think he's in touch with a view of the world that is real? So the real genius of Jesus is that our words and actions are the most reliable indicators of the unseen, hidden condition that we have. And this is why Jesus is introducing them here to the hiddenness of some aspects of spiritual reality. That the things we say and do come from this powerful inner reality. And so, again, what I'm sort of pleading with you here this morning is that if you do not authentically secure yourself in this unseen reality, then you're going to try to secure yourself in all manner of attitudes, words, and actions that preclude the practices of servant leadership. Thus, those wanting to be servant leaders must carefully observe the interior sources that energize and animate their actions, their attitudes, and the things that they say. So now having said that, let's get to a couple of principles here of servant leadership and we'll be done. I want to say again that I think Jesus is a genius and that he is the towering figure of all human history. Of course, the cross, of course resurrection, of course ascension, of course his present day work at the right hand of the Father, of course his teachings and deeds of power. But I just think we're not going to get very far in this if we don't actually hold Jesus in our heart to be competent. Seriously, I am a Jesus freak. I just think he's amazing and worthy of all my admiration, not just my religious worship. Come on, can you feel this with me? But my admiration. Who do you admire? Think of just somebody in your life who you admire. It could be a grandfather, a grandma, it could be a teacher, a coach. But I just want you to think of the way your mind and heart works when you actually admire somebody. And then ask yourself, do I feel that same thing about Jesus when he says these crazy things like, if someone slaps you on one side of the face, turn your other cheek? Like, do you admire that teaching? Do you have any sense of what he's saying to you? See, it's that kind of stuff. I mean, he taught amazing stuff. And here's one of them. The good woman or the good man brings good things out of the good stored up in them. And the evil man brings evil out of the evil stored up in him. Now, putting a modern twist on that, think genocides, school shootings, bombings, gang rapes, brutal killings, rampant spying and lying within and between national governments, teachers who have sex with their underage students. Jesus wants to say these are not flukes. These are not oops. They perfectly exhibit the hearts of the perpetrators. But the human heart doesn't merely motivate us in ruthless and negative ways. Think of the heroes who saved their neighbors during great, tragedies like floods. We see their hearts through their actions. Think of the actions of selfless police and firefighters and medical responders and ordinary people who pull strangers from burning cars, or who work with the homeless or care for the poor or show special respect for the elderly. These also are attitudes and actions that come out of the overflow of one's heart. So what Jesus wants us to know is that we can't work our way externally into the practices and attitudes and motivations of servant leadership. To do that, we have to work on our inward condition. I like to think of it this way. You can't unclog the arteries of your heart by taking a shower. Right? That external approach is going to leave the internal thing untouched, no matter how delightful and cleansing the shower might be. We might look fresh, but nothing has changed inside of us. The real problem is the clogged and dirty places of our heart. And to cleanse and clear our heart takes a completely different strategy. It means we need indirect effort. This is the genius of the millennia of teaching on spiritual formation, is that we need indirect effort. We need to train ourselves, not just try harder. Did you hear that? You train yourself. You don't just try on the moment. Because if you're trying in the moment to not be mean in a meeting, when everything in you wants to be mean, even if you're not mean, you're just a Pharisee. Did you catch that? You're tithing even down to a dill seed, but you don't have no heart of generosity. So you might occasionally pull off not being mean in a meeting when you feel mean, but that's not the same as having a heart who's not naturally and instinctively mean. So what's really going on there is what I want to call our wanters, the interior source of our desires. And if what that really is I want to win in this moment, catch this, especially every leader in this room, catch this. I need to win in this moment, because if I don't, I'm unsafe, or my vision's unsafe, or my strategy's unsafe. And because my position, my vision, and my strategies and tactics for getting to that vision are so all important, I'm willing then to bully a vestry member if needed. I'm willing to gossip about them if needed. I am willing to do whatever it takes. When that sentence is uttered in a church, again, all manner of hell has been unleashed. And it's almost always rationalized with something good. Our vision. Whatever. I am willing to do whatever it takes. And so we have to practice our way out of that. I don't know why. I guess I'm in a mood to be, no, I am in a mood to be Pentecostal, but mostly, I'll just be self-revelatory, meaning this business of indirect effort. Depending on the mood I am, I sometimes suffer from claustrophobia. And I got to fly all the time, so happy to be me, huh? So it means I don't really particularly like crowded elevators. But like this morning, coming down from the 6th floor, I just said to myself, well, let's practice dying. Let's get in this elevator, because at some point, I'm not going to be in control of my life. At some point, some cancer, some heart disease, just old age. At some point, I will not be in control. So let's use this elevator ride, as scary as it might be, and let's use it as a way to practice dying. That literally happened to me this morning. And I honestly, hand over my heart, I live my days that way. Just practicing. Just little things. Not just the big spiritual disciplines of silence and solitude and worship and prayer. Yes, of course I practice those things. But I literally take my calendar, the people and events of my life, and I practice these things. I don't mean to say I'm perfect at it. Of course I'm not. But this is what I mean by indirect effort. See, as I practice putting myself out of control, then I learn to be able to, then I can authentically do what Gary said last night. Okay. But not a pacifist, okay. This, I don't hear Gary, I've known Gary for decades. Gary's not passive. This isn't a kind of passivity. This is an abandonment to a superior reality. Did you just hear that? This isn't passivity. This is an abandonment to an authority and a power and an outcome that we couldn't get on our best day. That was the point of the story about his son. In the Navy. There was an outcome there that he couldn't have gotten if he wanted, no matter how much he might have powered up, based on a good rationale. Wouldn't have had that outcome. So see, unless we abandon ourselves, we really can't get at what Jesus is getting at. So I'll go on here. For instance, here's a couple of my favorite sayings. As someone who really values a peaceful and kind of slow and quiet life, somebody should have told me that I shouldn't have put on a purple shirt if I wanted that. But nevertheless, I do value a peaceful and slow and quiet life as much as I can get it. And I often say to colleagues and friends, hurry is not of the devil, hurry is the devil, right? I, for years, wrote in my, remember when we used to have paper calendars, I used to write in there, I need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry from my life. But when I look at my real calendar, it reveals that I'm not doing what I say I value. That there's a disconnect between, just like with Peter, there's a disconnect between my stated intention and the state of my heart that leads me to reflect then on my true posture. So I often ask myself, Todd, why can't you say no? I mean, just this week, going through this, I canceled a series of talks at a university on the East Coast and some other things I was doing because I already have 3 weeks totally full in January. And I have issues. Some of you know me personally. My wife has serious health issues, and there's all kinds of tentacles to that. And I just thought to myself, why can't you say no? And I thought, I'm going to try it. And so I wrote this I'm so sorry to ask this, but is there any way I could postpone my, trip? And they said yes. It was amazing. But I was dealing with my inner world. See what I'm saying? In a sense, it wasn't about the trip. It was about, Todd, why can't you say no? Why do you need to be needed more than my stated notional values and notional convictions? Why is it important that people notice, value, and comment on my contributions? Why do I have such a high need for constant achievement? Why does nothing drive me crazy? Why does doing nothing drive me crazy and make me feel unproductive? It's a number of years ago now, I lose track of time, but I was at a conference teaching with Dallas Willard, and Dallas was done with one of his talks, and we were doing Q&A with the audience, and some young guy, you've probably seen this happen, where some young guy, thought he was really smart, thought he was going to stand up and, challenge this world-class philosopher. So he didn't really ask a question. He was basically putting Dallas down and something Dallas had said. And when he was done, Dallas just simply said, "Thank you very much for your comments." So it's over, and we're like going out the door, 2 or 3 of us with Dallas. We're going to have lunch somewhere. And somebody says, "Dallas, why did you let that young kid do that to you? You could have just slaughtered him." And Dallas shrugged his shoulders and just said, "I'm just practicing not having to have the last word." And we're like the disciples with Jesus, like, that is a hard saying. And at lunch, we quizzed him about it more, and Dallas said, "Well, I've just noticed over my life since I was a very little boy." Now, you got to think about this. He's a world-class philosopher and dean of the School of Philosophy for years at USC, and an internationally known Christian author. And he said to us, "I've just noticed since I was a little boy, I feel like it's too important to me that people think well of me. So I practice being okay in the moment when someone doesn't think well of me." And we're like, whoa, that is a hard saying, right? But that's what I'm getting at here. Now, that's kind of a beautiful vision, right? But what happens is we all have these daily rationales for power-based leadership. Again, I might get hurt here. I have to secure myself by controlling the environment, by using power to govern the responses of others. Because here's what happens to most of us. If I don't protect myself, my vision and my goals, no one will. And so then power leadership gets motivated by some combination of that fear, insecurity, anxiety, or ego. It's self-serving, it's focused on self-gain, so that the power someone possesses, how to get more of that power and how to protect it becomes chief concerns for those who are power-based leaders. Servant leadership, on the other hand, please get this. I know I've been sitting here a long time this morning. I'm almost done. Servant leaders, on the other hand, focus on persons, not power. They don't ignore power. They know it's there, but it's not their focus. Servant leadership concentrates on becoming the kind of person that others intuitively trust. Servant leaders want what's good for others, employees, stockholders, customers, vendors, whoever. So from a slightly different angle, you might think about it this way. Why are humiliation, threats, blaming, intimidation, and condescending remarks the default position of so many leaders? And there is an answer to that question. Because many leaders need to win and thus humiliate others. Leaders need to get their way and thus threaten others. They need to be seen always in a positive light and thus they blame others. They need to give good news to those they report to, and thus they intimidate others into fudging reports when necessary. They need to be seen as powerful in every setting, and thus speak condescendingly to others. If you think Jesus is smart, if like me you think he's a genius, there is always a heart-based underlying reality for condescending to others. Always, inescapably. And that's why the invitation, not only to us leaders, but to everybody, is the transformation of our heart into Christ-likeness. See, now I know when I start talking like this, people wonder, well, isn't kindness and sort of caring behavior, doesn't that create soft leaders? You know, soft in the sense of being unable to do the right thing or make hard decisions. And I just want to say, actually, kindness and care are fundamental to and underlie good decisions and healthy friendships and families and neighborhoods and workplaces. Look, just try to get this. In the long run, nothing good happens without kind-heartedness. And every act of leadership that can be done through anger, bullying, threatening, or misleading can be done better through love. Better if you think Jesus is smart. If you think, well, he doesn't get the complexity of modern life. He never had to work with my vestry. No, he just had to work with Peter, James and John, and Judas. So go ahead, pick that fight with Jesus. Right? So I want to say that again. Every act of leadership that can be done through anger or bullying or threatening or misleading can be done better in servant-led ways motivated by love. Servant leadership does not lack the ability to be candid or clear or decisive. Do you think Jesus had a hard time being candid? And he's obviously the ultimate servant leader. He had no problem being candid. And I want to say that actually great decisions come out of the ability to live into this transcendent reality that loves the people and events of your life and mixes all that up in a way that people experience it as good for them. Mature servant leaders know how to be truly present to the people and events of their lives, and they know how to respond appropriately to a particular person or situation. So lastly here, in the phrase servant leadership, the word servant is a modifier of leadership. This is not a way of setting aside leadership. It's a way of doing leadership. Leadership's assumed. So far from letting things go, influencing the future in positive ways is the basic function of a leader. But a servant leader leads from a set of assumptions significantly different from the power or positional norms known in most workplaces. Of most importance, a servant leader sees himself as a servant first, serving others, employees, vendors, bankers, investors, shareholders, clients, customers, vestries, whoever. because they know that in serving them, the goodness of the kingdom comes. And so if humility is just sort of accurate self-knowledge, that's then at the core of a servant leader's confidence. Here we can do no better than the model of Jesus. John 13. Jesus knew that the Father had put him in complete charge of everything. Hear the power there? Remember where we started this morning? So hear Jesus' sense of the power he possesses. The Father had put him in complete charge of everything, that he had come from God and was on his way back to God. So, he got up from the supper table, set aside his robe, put on an apron, and washed his friends' feet. That's what you do with power. Look at me. If you think Jesus is smart, not was he successful in paying for your sins by the atonement of his blood on the cross, of course. But that's a different question than, is he smart? Does he have insight into the most basic of human transactions, which is leadership and followership? Does he know how it works? Does he know what you should do if you have ultimate power? And if you have ultimate power, you wash your friends' feet. Because then he said to them, see, I have set for you an example. I've laid down a pattern. What I've done, you do. So what do you suppose would be the condition of heart and soul of the leader who sought to serve others? What do you think would be the condition of someone's heart who could do that? Well, it's a Godward orientation. As we started with, Jesus knew that he'd come from the Trinity, was going back to the Trinity, and that this secure love gave him the confidence to risk being misunderstood while serving others. If that's the case, here's my final words. My paraphrase of Proverbs 4:23. So what I would commend to you. Therefore, put everything you have into the care of your heart. The hidden, causative, motivational you. For everything you do flows from it. It is the real source of your outward life. It determines what your life amounts to. Put everything you have into the care of your heart. The hidden, causative, motivational you, for everything you do flows from it. It is the real source of your outward life. It determines what your life amounts to. Amen.